Hello, everyone. Welcome to a quick learn session today on Excel 2013 tips and tricks. If you've attended the quick learn sessions in the past, you're familiar with these. They're a presentation style session, covering just usually one single topic. Today, as I mentioned, we'll be covering Excel 2013 tips and tricks. After the session, just so you're aware, I think Susie put this in the chat, but just to verbally say it as well, we are recording today's session, and the link to the recording I will send in the follow-up email after today's session. My name is Tennille Fincham, and I'm a technology instructor with KUIT. Also with me today is Susie Johannes, also a technology instructor with KUIT, and she'll be helping to facilitate today's questions and give you information as needed through the chat window there. If you do have questions from today's session, a couple of ways we can address those. First, you can type in the chat in the corner there and pose your question there. If you want to, you can unmute your microphone and ask your question verbally. It's whichever format you prefer. If you're new to using Skype for Business, just a few meeting tips. First, since I am showing my screen today, it'll probably be best to maximize your window. That way you get the best viewing results. Secondly, if you're not currently asking a question through your microphone, we ask that you keep your microphone muted, and this will just help to cut down on any feedback during the session. And then finally, if you'd like to ask a question through the chat, or if you'd like to see, what is currently going on in the chat, you can click on the chat message icon, which is in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, to ask questions and also see the current running chat. With that, let me tell you what we're going to be going over today. Most of the time I'm going to be spending within Excel and just showing you all of these different things. So we'll be talking about finding hidden data. Also be talking about some shortcuts you can use to enter data. I'll show you a shortcut for rearranging columns. We'll also be talking about conditional formatting to find duplicates in your data, and then how you may go about removing the duplicates from your data. Also within there, we'll be talking about tables versus just a strict cell range, some advantages of using a table, and what a table looks like versus a cell range. And then we'll end the day today with talking about a few more keyboard shortcuts, and also talking about the quick access toolbar, which is a way that you can sort of build your own shortcut menu using the tools that you use most often in Excel. So with that, I'm going to bring up a Excel worksheet that we're going to work on today. Now this first one here, just a couple of tips about this particular worksheet. This is something that the few things that I'm going to do the first here are something that you'd want to do if you inherit a worksheet. So we all get those workbooks that are from someone else. We kind of have to find our way around and figure out, what's going on within the worksheet, what the worksheet looks like, where the data is located, things like that. Two big things when you're inheriting a worksheet are finding and seeing all the data. So the first one here, probably all familiar with this, but this actually has some columns that are hidden. A quick way that you can tell when columns are hidden are at the top here for the column sort of names. It skips from being in alphabetical order to skipping some information between. So this one, starts at B and then skips over to G. Also, in between here, there's there's like a double gray line, and that sort of indicates that there's columns, hidden between B and G. So to unhide those columns, you want to select before and after. So we want to make sure we select column B and then click and drag to select a G. So the columns that are before and after the hidden portion. And then here we can right click and choose unhide, and we get the rest of our columns, there with our information. Now the other thing that's maybe a little less apparent is if individuals have hidden worksheets. So at the bottom here, I just see two worksheets. I have this enter data and this employee descriptions. A good thing when you inherit is to right click on an existing worksheet and choose unhide. And this will list any hidden worksheets that may be within the workbook. so that you can get sort of the full scope of the data. And then, if I want to unhide them, I just select one and click OK. And now I have that hidden worksheet as a part of my, worksheets at the bottom here. So a good idea to do for when you inherit a worksheet. All right, so the next thing here is using flash fill. Now, all I've done here on our data set is I've just typed in these names of the individuals. So all I did was click on the cell and start typing to get the information in. In Excel 2013 and above, for PC users only, so any Mac users, this won't be available for you, but I'll show you another way that you can do this. You can use something called flash fill. So the most important thing with flash fill is that, one, you have to have some data for the cell to look at when you're using flash fill. So as data for this one are this list of names. And secondly, it has to be somewhat adjacent so that I can actually look at that value. So flash fill, let's take a look at this. So what I want to do is just start typing in the pattern that I want to have for this column. And in this case, the pattern is just a list of first names only. So I'll type Tennille. And then notice how I start to type Susie, and all of a sudden I get this sort of grayed out list of the rest of the names. And this is flash fill working. And so now all I need to do at this point is hit enter, and that data is filled in for me. So that's flash fill. Again, has to be somewhat adjacent to the original set of data, which is, this column C here, and has to have some actual data to look at. Now, same thing for last name here. I would just start typing Fincham and then Johannes. Here's that grayed out list again, but let's say that I keep typing through, Susie's name here, and now I no longer see that grayed out list, and I press enter and nothing's really doing it. Well, here I can come over to the autofill handle, which we'll be talking about a lot today. So first kind of jump into that. So autofill handle here, when you hover over the far bottom right corner of a cell, you get a black plus sign, and this is the autofill handle. So using the autofill handle, I can click and drag down to the bottom. Now, by default, what this is going to do is it's just going to copy Susie's last name over and over again. But I get this autofill options box at the bottom. And here, if I click on the drop down, I can select flash fill. So autofill options box at the bottom of the cell, and then flash fill. And that may take a little bit of time for it to show on your screen, but that should update then to be the relevant last names looking, adjacent to the cells. You can also use flash fill to format cells in a way that you want. So, I have this listed out as the first name individually, the last name individually, and then I have their name listed out as first name space last name. But I can also reformat this to be something like last name, comma, space, first name. So here, I just want to type out the way that I want it to appear. So I'd say Fincham, comma, space, Tennille, and hit enter. And then start doing the same thing for Susie's name. And eventually you'll start to see a gray list below, just like we saw with the other names here. And if I hit enter now at this point, then that will auto-fill in and be formatted in the way that I want. So does that make sense? Are there any questions about using flash fill? Okay. The next one here is, in this example, we have some employee ID numbers. And our employee ID numbers happen to start with, or, these fake employee ID numbers happen to start with leading zeros on the number. So you may have experienced this before when you start to enter in information with leading zeros and then, the numbers after and press enter. It strips out all of the zeros that are, leading the number here. So instead, what you have to do if you have leading zeros on a number is you have to enter in a single quote and then your numbers. So a single quote, and then I can enter in the leading zeros and the full number there and press enter. And now I have, the leading zeros on this. Now, another thing with autofill, we're just going to say that our employee ID numbers, maybe we're a brand new company and so these are the first employees. You can use autofill to auto-populate the information down below. Now, by default, what this is going to do, I'm just going to click and drag like we did before. By default, what this is going to do is it's going to do something called fill the series. And so since this is a number, it's just numerically, gaining one or adding one to the number below. So this is fine for this case, but another instance that you can use Flash or autofill to help you fill in information. Now, another way that you can use autofill is to recognize a pattern in numbers. So, in the example with the employee ID number, we just used it to fill sequentially down. So we didn't have any sort of pattern other than it was just in a number sequence. But you can also define your own number sequence. So let's say that for this onboarding number, maybe everyone gets numbered in groups of like 3. So it starts at 1, and then after that we have 4, and then adding another 3 to this we have 7. So our pattern is to add 3, for each one going down. Well, I can use autofill to complete this series for me. So in this case, the important thing to do is to select the numbers that define the series. And in our case, it's the 3 numbers of 1, 4, and 7. So it defines it by adding 3 each time to the cell. And here I can use the autofill. I could click and drag like we did before, but an even easier way is to, once you get the black plus sign down here in the corner, if you double left click, then that will autofill down. And here's the tricky part. It autofills down to where you have the last line of data. So the first empty row is what it'll fill down to. So if you have a continuous data set, that's no problem. But if you have empty rows or empty columns, then you'll start to notice some problems if you use the autofill. All right, so I'm going to skip over data validation for right now. We will come back to that. But the next things I want to talk about are the concatenate formula and also the ampersand formula. So, or the ampersand formula and concatenate function, sorry about that. So concatenate, what that allows you to do is to combine multiple text strings together. So this is if you're a Mac user and you're not able to use flash fill, you can use concatenate instead. So we can combine the information to display as last name, comma, space, first name. So here, you just want to click into the cell. We're going to do an equals, and I always forget how to spell this, but once you do like C-O-N, this pops up here and you can press tab. And now we're right into identifying these two text values to concatenate or join together. So our first one is text 1. Since we want this one to be last name, comma, first name, we're going to select cell, in this case, the last name, which is in cell E6, and then we're going to do a comma space. Now we're on to text 2, so this is a little bit bolder. Now this is also tricky with concatenate because we want to have a comma space in between the 2 text strings, the 2 cells. We have to put that in quotations. So we have to say quotation, comma, space, quotation. So that's our text string 2. And then we're going to do a comma space, and that leads us on to text string 3. So the next information that we want to have here, and in our case, that's the first name. So we would click on cell D6. And now when we press enter, we have our data formatted in the way that we want. And we can use autofill here. So again, I can hover in the lower right-hand corner and double click, and it will essentially write that function down this column and use the relative references to pull in the names over. Another way that you can achieve the same thing, so here concatenate, that's a function, it's a pre-built thing within Excel. We just need to add in the values that we want to do. The other thing we can do here is a formula using the ampersand, and the formula basically combines cells together as well. So it does the same thing, it's just a different way of typing it. So especially if you can't remember the concatenate, this is a good one to kind of have in your back pocket as well. So here, using the ampersand, again, we have to do the equal sign. And here we want first name space last name. So we would select, in our case, cell D6. That's where our first names are located. And then instead of using a comma space or seeing the function there, we just do an ampersand. So D6 ampersand. Now, again, since we want to have this space in between the first name and the last name, we do have to put that in quotes. So we have quote, space, quote. And then another ampersand. And here is last name, so we would select, in our case, cell E6. And now when we press enter, that is formatted as well. So again, I can click on the cell and autofill this down by double clicking, and I have in, the newly formatted names there. All right, one last thing here, and then I'll pause for questions over anything we've covered so far. The next one is carriage returns. So I'm just going to copy and paste this description that I have on another page or on another worksheet here. I'm just going to paste this into the cell. So here, we have the description, and then we have this date modified portion after. And let's say that we want this date modified to be its own return space down so that it's a little bit easier to read. If you've tried to do this before, you're probably familiar with this. We can double click to edit, but as soon as we hit return or enter to move that down the next line, we actually get jumped to the next cell. We could double click in here and add in lots of spaces, but then, if anything changes, then we've got to go in and take out all those spaces, and it can get really frustrating. Plus, if you have to add in, 30 spaces for each individual's date modified for their job description, that's going to get old really fast. So instead, I'm going to delete off these spaces here. You can enter in a carriage return within a cell, and you can do that by doing Alt-Enter. So Alt-Enter on the keyboard, and that will add a return into that cell and move that information down. So Alt-Enter for the carriage return there. And now, if I just press Enter again, then I'm down to my next line of data. So any questions over anything that we have gone over so far before we get to the data validation? All right, I'm not seeing anything pop up on the chat here, so I'm going to keep going, but for sure if you have questions as we go, feel free to type those in the chat. All right, so data validation. Data validation can be really nice. This case we have departments. So we're going to create a list here for people to choose the department that the individual is a part of. Now, the good thing about using this is that it makes your data really consistent, because if you have multiple people that are entering in information on a single spreadsheet, I could type out the word department, and then Susie's filling this information out, and she could type out just DEPT. And then we have some inconsistent data. So data validation allows you to create a list of terms that people can select from, and then you have really consistent data for your worksheets. So for data validation, the first thing that I always do when I'm setting up a list, and this is if I set up one list or this is if I set up, multiple lists, is that I always create a new worksheet. When you create a new worksheet here, it will help to keep your information a little bit cleaner. And also, if someone inherits this workbook from you, it kind of gives them a better indicator that you may be using validation lists and where those data validation lists may be located in case they have to update them. So here, I have sheet 1. I typically go ahead and type in like validation lists as the title. So validation lists, and then press enter. And then here, I just start listing out the values that I want people to choose from. So the first one, I go ahead and I label this department, and then I just start to list out the values here. So you have training, accounting, and maybe human resources. So I have my list of values that I want people to choose from. Now, the next thing that I do that will help quite a bit is to create a named range. So a named range allows you to assign a nickname to a group of cells, and that way you can refer to it by the nickname as opposed to having to say the location of the cells where the data is. So to create a named range, you'll simply select the data that you want to add a nickname for, come up to Formulas, and choose Define Name. Here, I'm going to title this department so that as I'm building my data validation, I know which nickname to refer to. And then here, notice that it says refers to, and it gives you the location of the cells. So the location of these cells that this nickname refers to is the group of cells A2 through A4 on the validation list worksheet. And then here I can click OK. So I have department. Now, another thing that can be quite nice if you are inheriting a worksheet is to have a place to see these lists of names. So first place that you can see this list of names is in the Name Manager on the Formulas tab. So Name Manager. This lists out the different nicknames that you may have set up for cells. It also will list the values and what it refers to and also the scope. There's also kind of a nice keyboard shortcut here. I'm just going to click into an empty cell. If you press F3, so F as in Frank, 3, F3, and this gives you the list of named ranges that you have in the workbook. And here I can say paste list. And this is kind of nice. This is good if you are inheriting a worksheet because now I can see all of them all at once and the cells that it refers to. So I quickly kind of have a cheat sheet when I first am looking at a workbook and trying to figure out what's going on, kind of behind the scenes. All right, so the last step for the data validation is I'm going to click back onto my Enter Data screen. I just want to select the cells where I want the data validation to be present. So in our case, I want that to be in cells I6 through I16. And then I'm going to come up to Data and then Data Validation. So Data, Data Validation. Here it says validation criteria, and under where it says allow, I want to say list. So allow a list to be the inputted values for the cell. And then the source, since we have that named range, we can just do equals department and OK. Now let's take a look. We get a drop down next to each one of these cells, and located in the drop down then are those values that we had inputted on the worksheet before. So we have training, accounting, and human resources, and I can go through and select, each of those for each of the individuals. Now let's say that we forgot to add in a department. We actually need to update our list and then update the named range. So here, to add in more options, we would click on validation lists. Go ahead and add that here. So I may say like facilities and enter. And then I do want to come to formulas, name manager, and I want to edit this department formula. So edit. And then I just want to make sure that I select, all of the things, including the newly added facilities option. And then click OK and close. And now if I come back to enter data, this is already updated for me because I'm using that named range. So now I can click onto facilities, down here at the bottom and add that because I used that name range and updated that. So data validation and name ranges. Any questions over anything with this particular workbook? So it looks like maybe a question. I can make a cheat sheet for this. We'll also have this recording that can be referred back to, but I can make a cheat sheet that has the stuff from today in it. So there's a question about sorting for data validation. Yeah, you can still do when you sort your worksheet, and that will actually make it, probably a lot easier if you're using data validation because then you get the same values. So you can still sort your worksheet. Well, let me double check with data validation. We'll also take a look at a table, which also is a really quick way to do some sorting. Let me double check. I'll also check this like with a table and see if you're able to sort on that way. So I'll double check and put that in the follow-up email. One last thing here is I wanted to show you how to move information quickly. So, we have this column G here. I could, copy and paste and move this, but you can actually click and drag and drop to move columns. So all I've done here is just selected the full column G, and then you're going to put your mouse over the borders of that column and you get sort of a black crosshair. And with the black crosshair, you can click and drag, and I could drag this all the way, to the front to rearrange. And then I'd probably want to delete this empty column. But so you can rearrange really quickly just by clicking and dragging the information back and forth. Cool. Okay, so any last questions about anything with this worksheet? All right, so I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to move on to this next portion here. And for that, I have a different workbook. All right, so this workbook, this particular worksheet is just a list of, sample data with a mailing list. And we're going to do a couple of things here. We're going to be talking about sorting and filtering. We'll also talk about maybe the advantages of using a table. And then we'll also talk about finding duplicate values and removing those duplicate values if needed. So the first thing here I'm going to talk about is sorting. Also, just a note here, I have added an additional column to this worksheet just by using the flash fill so that I could combine the first name and the last name together. And that's going to be helpful when I'm searching for duplicates, and we'll be able to see why in just a moment. But just a note there that I did add in this extra column to use flash fill to combine the first name and the last name. All right, so if I wanted to sort by the city, maybe being in alphabetical order, I can select that column. We're using just a range of cells here, so select that column, come up to sort and filter from the Home tab, and say sort A to Z. Now, the important thing here is to, when you get the sort warning, is to leave the expand selection on. If you say continue with the current selection, your data is going to get moved around because the line records won't stay with one another. But if you expand the selection, then it'll, keep those lines together. So here, just be sure if you ever get this warning to do expand selection and then sort. Also, sometimes what happens, this isn't happening for this worksheet, but sometimes what happens is then your heading row gets sort of sorted in the same alphabetical order as the information that you did want to sort. So in that case, what you can do before you sort is you can, make this a different format. So you could kind of bold this and then apply your sort. And that could help without these being, within the alphabetical order here. The next thing that we're going to do is, we're going to look for duplicates, and we're going to look for duplicates that are the same first name and the last name. So anytime that there's the same first name and last name, we kind of want to call that to our attention so we can take a closer look and see if they are indeed a duplicate record or if it's just the same or two different people with the same first name and last name. So the first thing that's a good idea is to use something called conditional formatting to find the duplicates. And that way it calls your attention to it in a way that it highlights a cell. And then you're not, removing any data until you're for sure that it's a duplicate. So here, you'll just want to select the cells that you want to apply conditional formatting to. Now here's a keyboard shortcut. If I want to select all of the data in the column C, but I just want to select the data that's been entered, I can click on cell C1 and do a Shift Control down arrow key. And this will select down to the last line of data that I have filled in. So this is in lieu of, clicking and dragging down to row 521. So that's Shift Control and the down arrow key. Now to apply conditional formatting to find the duplicates, once I have that selected, I can click on Conditional Formatting, choose Highlight Cells Rules, and the very bottom one is Duplicate Values. So Highlight Cells Rules, Duplicate Values. By default, it's going to look for the duplicate values. You could also find unique values. So that could be helpful in some instances. In our case, we want to see the duplicates, and then I'm just going to leave this as the default, which is it's going to make the cell a light red fill, and it's going to make the text a dark red. So here, I'll just click OK. And then you can notice right away that we have, these cells that are that light red fill, and we can quickly browse through and see them. Now we have a lot of records here, so it'd probably be pretty tedious to have to go through and try to find, each one of these. So instead, I'm going to show you how you can use a table to quickly see just those duplicate values. So a table, you can create this in multiple ways. A keyboard shortcut for creating a table, and this works if your data is continuous, meaning you don't have any empty columns in the middle or empty rows in the middle. So if you have a continuous set of data, so you'll select a cell, within your data set, and you can do a Control T as in Tom, and it will select over to your last column of information and down to your last row of information in your data set. And here, it just confirms, it says, where is the data for your table? And it gives you the cell range, so A1 through M521. And then here we just want to make sure that because we do have headers for our table, that it is indeed selected for my table has headers. And here, click OK. Now what you can do is a couple of things. So first, maybe the first thing I would do is to sort instead of by city like we did earlier. So instead of sorting city by alphabetical order, maybe we'll first sort the first name, last name column by alphabetical order. Now because we're working within a table, we don't have to worry about expanding our selection. So a good thing with tables is that you can sort and don't have to worry about, your records being messed up in any strange way. So here I'm going to click the drop down under first name, last name, and I'm going to say sort A to Z. So we have that sorted. Now the next thing that you can do with a table, and you can do this with a range of cells as well, but a table makes it a lot easier, is you can filter. So here, same thing, the drop down arrow under first name, last name, I get a list of all the names that are there. So, I could filter on just one individual name. But what I can do, since I have the conditional formatting set, is I can filter by color. So filter by color. And then here, I can select that light red fill. So light red fill. And now I'm given just those cells that are in the light red fill, which in our case indicates that it's a duplicate value. And I can browse through these really quickly and make sure that it's, indeed a duplicate record and not actually individual records. Now I do have one here that is not a duplicate record. So both first name, last name of Joseph Smith. But if you take a look at the additional line items here, we have two different companies. We also have two different addresses, two different states. So that indicates, pretty clearly that this individual is not a duplicate record. So something to keep in mind when you do remove duplicates. So, once I'm ready, once I've reviewed all the records, I've identified that there are some here that are not a duplicate value that do not need to be removed. Maybe I'll go back to my full data set here. So we'll do a clear filter from first name, last name to get back. So now, and once I'm sure I can remove the duplicates, again, I'm just going to click somewhere in my data set. I'm going to come up to data. And then right above data validation, there is a remove duplicates button. So remove duplicates. Now, I could have it look across all of these fields, and if everything in all of these fields was exactly the same, then it would remove those duplicate values. Here, I'm going to choose unselect all, and I'm going to choose first name, last name. So what this is saying is if a duplicate value is found in the column of first name, last name, it's going to keep the first record of that, and then it's going to remove any following records. Well, that would be okay, except for remember we have Joseph Smith listed twice, and they are not duplicate values. So here I'd want to add in another identifier. So maybe something like email address, since I know those are different. So now if their first name and last name is the same, and if they have the first email address, then it will retain the first record of that and remove the duplicates after. So here I'm going to keep that selected first name, last name, and email, and click OK. And it's going to tell you, 18 duplicate values were found, and now we have 502 unique values, and I can click OK. Now, if I do the filter again here to filter by the color, I just have those 2 duplicate values that were found of just Joseph Smith, which is exactly what I want because this is not a duplicate value, but everything else was. So here, I can clear my filter from the first name, last name, and get back to my full data set. If I wanted to remove, somewhere down here, I still have Joseph Smith. This is still, in that light color. If I wanted to remove the conditional formatting for this, so I no longer wanted this to appear as a different color, again, I need to select all the cells where it's applied. So C1, Shift, Control, down arrow key. And then I can come to Home, Conditional Formatting, Clear Rules, and clear rules from selected cells. And then I no longer have, Joseph's name standing out in the crowd. So this is no longer, formatted differently. Any questions on, using conditional formatting to find those duplicate values, or removing the duplicate values, or anything with tables? Yeah, great question. So you can go back to just a range of cells, and that is done by clicking a cell somewhere within your table, and then you can right-click, choose Table, and choose Convert to Range. And then you'll click Yes, and it takes you back to a normal range. Now it does retain like the table formatting. So if you had the banding of the rows, is what this is called. If it has the shading every other row, and if it has, a different color in the heading, it does retain that format. You're welcome. Any other questions over either of the worksheets from today? Does anyone use any of these tools currently? Awesome. I'm glad it was helpful. I do have a couple of last things to show you here. I told you that after you convert this back to a range, we have the format still applied, so like the banding and things like that. We can remove that format without removing the actual contents of the cells. So here, I'm going to use my keyboard shortcut because it's one of my favorites. So I'm clicking A1, Control Shift down arrow key, and then holding Control Shift down still the right arrow key, and that will select down to my last row of data and over to my last column of data. So everything's selected here. On the Home tab in the very far corner, we have a Clear button, and if you click on the drop down here, you can choose to just clear formats. So clear formats, and that will still retain the data in the cell, but just remove the format that's applied. So that can be helpful. There's also another one here that's a clear all, and that removes all of the contents and the formatting that's applied to a cell. And then there's another one here that's clear contents, and it will retain the formatting, but just clear the content of the cell. So if something was shaded blue, it would still be shaded blue, but then have no content in it. Another thing that you may want to do if you're inheriting worksheets is to come to the sort and filter tool here. And if the clear is highlighted, just choose clear, and that will remove any filters that are on the data. And that way you know that you're looking at the full set of data, which can be really helpful and sometimes not always apparent if you inherit a really large worksheet or a workbook from someone. All right, so just a few keyboard shortcuts to end the day, and I will send these out in the follow-up email. So if you have any questions on these, you'll have kind of a cheat sheet for that. So just so you can see what they do, the first one here is Control Home. That takes you to cell A1. So we'll always take you to cell A1. This can be helpful if you're, in the weeds, kind of down here in the bottom, somewhere in your worksheet, and you just want to get to the top really quickly. Control Home, will take you up right up there. Another one that can be really helpful is Control End. So Control End. That takes you to the bottom of your worksheet. So that can be helpful too if you're next in line maybe to enter some data. And you're all the way at the top of the worksheet, you can do a Control End to get you down where you need to start entering. But you might have to scroll over here, but at least gets you closer than we were before. So Control Home and Control End. Just a couple here to add in formatting. So we'll play around with this a little bit. Let me scroll up here. Let's say that the zip code is actually currency. A shortcut for that is Control Shift and the $sign, and we'll change that to currency. So again, let's select the cells, Control Shift $sign to get to currency real quick. Another good one to kind of remember is Control Shift and the percent icon, so Control Shift 5, and that will change this to a percentage for any of your selected cells. So those can be really helpful. It's nice because then you don't have to take your hands off the keyboard to change the formatting for something that you may use quite often. This one is when you are creating a formula. So by default, it uses something called relative references. So the location of your cells will change. Sometimes you want that to be absolute so that the location doesn't ever change. And you can use a keyboard shortcut to reference a cell absolutely. So here, if I select cell H2, I can quickly click F4, and now that makes that absolute. So let me do that again here. Before we just have H2. Now if I press F4, we have $H, $2, and that just changes it from being a relative reference to an absolute reference. So if you're used to using formulas and it's kind of annoying to have to enter in the $sign each time, F4 will save you some time there. All right, so we talked about the F or the Control Shift and arrow keys. Another one here, I'm just going to type in some data, is the Alt equals, and that's a shortcut for the AutoSum. So let me do that again here. I just selected the cell clear this out. I just selected the cell below the numbers that I just entered here. And if I want to sum these together, the shortcut for AutoSum is Alt equals. And it will select the cells above your selection that have data in it. And then I can press enter and get the sum for that. And then another one that can be helpful, let me open up this worksheet because we have multiple, or workbook because we have multiple worksheets, is the control page up and page down. And that moves your focus to different worksheets. So that's control and then the page up and page down keys. And then we also talked about the Alt Enter, which adds the carriage return within a cell. So with that, are there any questions over anything that we've gone over today, or any questions over the keyboard, just those few keyboard shortcuts there? Okay, so I'll stick around. Looks like there's a couple of questions coming in. I'll stick around, but for the rest of you, let me just pop up these slides here. I do, just want to make a note that we will have some additional training opportunities. So in the fall, we'll be deploying a pivot tables course, and also we'll have an advanced functions and formulas course. So look for those on the open workshops calendar coming this fall. So if you want even more Excel training there. Also, if you like any of the trainings that we're doing, we can always come over and do a departmental training for your group. And then the open workshops are quick learn series. And then we do offer desk side coaching if you need to talk about something specifically. As an ending here, I will send a link to the recording. I'll also send some additional learning resources and answers to outstanding questions. If you need to go, thank you all for your time today. Looks like there's a couple of questions here. One, any keyboard shortcut for inserting a row? Possibly, but another thing for inserting a row is, most of the time you will select a row, right click and choose insert, and you just get one at a time. And if you have to do this more than 3 times, or at least for me, if I have to do this more than 3 times, it gets pretty frustrating. What you can do is if I needed to insert 3 rows, I can select 3 rows first and then right click and choose insert, and it will insert in 3 rows automatically for me. I can look to see if there's a keyboard shortcut, but that's another, kind of tip as well. Same thing for columns. I could select multiple columns and then choose insert, and it would insert, more than one column at a time. Oh yes, the other thing here is the quick access toolbar. So at the top here, we have our ribbon tab, and then we have the quick access toolbar right above that. And we have a save button by default. We also have an undo button and a redo button, but this is completely customizable. So, I could find a tool like this wrap text. I could find this wrap text tool, right click and choose add to quick access toolbar. And now that's in, my arsenal up here from the top. And no matter what tab I'm clicked in, that will always be available. Now, where this really starts to come into play and really helpful is that this actually becomes kind of your own built shortcut menu. So here, let's see, I'll kind of do this here so we can see what that looks like. If I wanted to activate, the wrap text tool, I could just select that and that wraps it. However, if you hold down the Alt key, it will actually give you like numbers underneath. And you can do like an Alt 4, and that will apply that as well. And it looks like Alt IR for inserting rows. Cool. Thanks, Andrew. So Alt IR. Awesome. Does anyone else have any keyboard shortcuts that they use that save their lives in Excel? Oh yeah, Control Y. So if Control Z and then Control Y for undo, that's a good one. Or for redo. So Control Z is undo and Control Y for redoing the last actions. That's good. Very good. Well, again, thank you all for your time today. I'll send out the follow-up email and a cheat sheet of what I talked about today and the link to the recording. If you do have any other questions, feel free to email Susie or I, and we will help you in any way we can. So thank you all for your time and have a great afternoon.